Mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cell. We learned that in high school biology, but their role in longevity and overall health goes way beyond energy production. As we get older, our mitochondria become less efficient. That leads to fatigue and brain fog and muscle loss and increased inflammation and just accelerating the aging process from the inside out. The good news, there are cutting edge strategies to restore and optimize mitochondrial function. Joining us today, and actually welcome back to the show, is Dr. Elizabeth Yurth, a nationally recognized expert in regenerative medicine, longevity, and cellular health. As a co-founder and medical director of the Boulder Longevity Institute, Dr. Yurth has spent years researching and applying cutting-edge strategies to improve mitochondrial function, optimize energy production, and ultimately slow down the aging process. In today's episode, we're going to explore the essential role mitochondria play in longevity, discuss key signs of mitochondrial dysfunction, and break down the most effective peptide and supplement strategies to enhance mitochondrial health. Let's get to it. So, Dr. Yurth, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Greg.
All right. I'm so excited that I'm just really honored that you made time for this. And I feel like I just saw you because
we were just at a very cool conference together, COM conference. And you did a great talk on sleep, which I don't know about you, but I find that's one of the hardest things to work on with people.
Oh, it is. Even on myself. It's like on people. Myself.
I'm fine with sleep. Staying awake a little harder, but sleep I'm good on.
Yeah, I know. It's like I have a whole ritual I do, and it took me a while to figure it out.
Yeah,
and I know
you got it.
Oh man, I had to do the soup gumbo, which is give me everything that helps with sleep, and then finally figure out what works.
And that works.
I started taking things away, right? And then I was like, oh, this is the thing that's missing. So, but no, it was a really cool conference, and I'm really happy, to have seen you guys there. And your presentation was, you're an amazing presenter as it is, and get to learn a little bit more about some of the off-label stuff.
Thank you. I always learn from you too.
I know, and I was like, oh man, I was like, dang it, and we were like, we're talking mitochondria today, and I was like, oh, should have did pentosan, but there will be time for that as well. So, and it's been a little while since we had you on the podcast. So, tell me some of the cool things you've been up to since the last time we spoke on the show.
Geez, honestly, just lecturing a lot. So I've been flying out every weekend to go lecture. That's been both intriguing and fun, but a little trying because I have my routines that I like a lot. So that's a little hard to get out of the routine. So I was just right before the COM conference, I was at the Integrative Health Symposium, which is a little bit more maybe along your realm a lot, where there's, a little bit more holistic view of things. Sometimes I think we get, even in this functional medicine space, very caught up in all these very cool things. And it was kind of be back around a group of people who were thinking very just holistically and about health, which I think we maybe need to backtrack a little bit sometimes too. I think we get so caught up in all these very fancy peptides and things, and we need to backtrack to some of the basics. So it was a really fun conference to go to. So I think that's, where we've been working a lot on how do we actually refine things down for our patients. I think, we throw a lot at our patients and we expect a lot from them. And we've been really trying to whittle down how do we work a little bit more within a smaller realm of supplements and working more with mindset. We hired a mindset coach to help work with people's mental sort of attitude, right? How do I get myself better? So that's been really, a little bit less is more focus instead of just, adding another fancy new tool.
That's really cool. And sometimes it is go back to the basics. And we talk to our patients here because everyone and I don't know about you, it's like they see you lecture, they see you on podcasts, and it's like, oh, you do all these really cool peptides and all these different treatments. And it's like, I want that. Right. And I'm like, hold on, you don't have any vitamin D. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you're not there yet, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the basics.
And I know, we do the analogy.
Take some hormones, right? Exercise, eat well, and now we can talk about those things.
Yeah, and such analogies I feel like are the way I connect with people. And I'm always like, look, I don't want you to put a waterfall and a LED screen in your backyard and all these great things and put a pool in there with a hot tub and your front yard is literally a minefield, right? Or exactly. Your house is dilapidated, right? So you need to build the house and then we get to the other things, right? And I think people kind of understand that your foundation has to be set or these things just won't work. Or
I think that is something that maybe gets a little bit, especially in this world of where Instagram and all these things are throwing out a lot of cool new stuff, I think it gets a little lost.
Oh yeah, definitely does. So speaking of the basics, right? And so we're going to talk about mitochondria, right?
Yeah.
And so, and mostly everyone, we learn mitochondria in biology. It's like, oh, it's the organelle, it's the powerhouse of the
Yeah.
cell, and then it's all stop, and you don't hear the word again
Yeah.
until it's too late. So, and even as physicians, I mean, we learn biochemistry, we're learning mitochondria and metabolic pathways, and it's like, oh, that's great, and you learn those really severe mitochondrial diseases, which you hardly ever really see in practice.
Exactly.
But can you tell me why mitochondria are so essential for overall health and longevity?
Yeah, I think that you're right. When we were taught mitochondria, we all remember the one thing we remember from high school is the powerhouse of the cell, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what we really think. These little, and they're cool, right? They came from this bacteria that invaded us and made us aerobic organisms. So they're really cool, but they have their own little, their entire own DNA. They actually they're controlling us, and yet they were these sort of foreign integrations into our cells. So they're actually really, really interesting. And they actually now, you've got to think they actually do a whole lot more than just energy. Number one, they make all the ATP we need to survive. So could not live without every cell containing a lot of mitochondria. But I think we forget about all the other cool things they do and why that is so critical to overall health, and why when there's mitochondrial dysfunction, it's not just low energy states. There's a lot of other things that go wrong. For instance, calcium homeostasis. The mitochondria is actually responsible for how much calcium is going in and out of the cell, which is critical to cardiac function and things like brain function and bone function. They also actually sort of tell the cell when it's done, when it needs to kill itself off. So they're actually probably one of the key players in cancer. When the mitochondria doesn't tell the cell, listen, you're out of control, then we can develop cancer. So really, mitochondria disease is at the stem of cancer, and we never really thought of it that way before. The other big thing is that they're responsible for all the production of reactive oxygen species. Because as they make ATP, they are spitting out these reactive oxygen species like superoxides and hydrogen peroxides that we need to get rid of. And so if that's out of control and they're spitting out too much free radicals, then we go into an oxidative stress state, and that's a bad state to be in and ultimately can kill us and cause all sorts of other problems. But the last piece that I even forget about a lot is how important they are in hormones. Right? You don't think about mitochondria and hormone production. And so when we think about hormones and people's hormones going awry, people who have mitochondrial dysfunction actually don't make hormones well. So they're essential for steroid hormone production, including cortisol, aldosterone, all of your sex hormones. And so actually the very first step in making steroid hormones, that's all of your testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, is when cholesterol is converted to pregnenolone by this enzyme that's in the mitochondria, this P450 enzyme that's in the mitochondria. So it's in the mitochondrial membrane. So if that mitochondria is not working well, I actually can't convert my cholesterol into steroidal hormones. And I think people forget about that, right? So when we see somebody who we're putting on hormones and they're not doing well for some reason, might that be because of mitochondrial dysfunction? They're also really key for vitamin D metabolism, thyroid hormone metabolism. You remember that our thyroid gland produces T4, but it's the mitochondria that contains the enzymes that convert T4 to T3. And remember, T3 is the active thyroid hormone for metabolism and energy production. So I think we forget about all those things in terms of the mitochondria. Like, I know I do. Like, I don't really think about when my patient's not doing well with hormones, could it be a mitochondrial issue, or their thyroid, their T4 is high, but their T3 is low. And we always think about, oh, well, we'll just support more T3, when maybe we should be thinking about something that's gone wrong in the mitochondrial membrane, which is why the T4 is not converting to T3. So I really want to emphasize that, because I think people don't know that, and a lot of doctors actually don't even know that.
Oh, that's good to know. I mean, I would say that I haven't really heard that one before. We don't think about it directly.
Right, you don't think
It's
about it
just
directly, right? Indirectly, you kind of know it, but you actually don't think that's all going on in the mitochondrial membrane. So if my mitochondria aren't functioning well, I actually can't do any of these essential processes to life. Now, making ATP being at the forefront, but all these other things are absolutely critical too.
And then the other one that I always think about with patients and myself as well is immune system function, how they're critical for that as well. And so I think that when you get this kind of, I call it the deranged mitochondria, where they're just spitting out too much reactive oxidative species, and they're just putting this out and damaging themselves and the cells around them. This is when I talk to people, it's just like every patient we see we're treating their mitochondria. Whether it's
Exactly.
yeah,
We
if I'm
indirectly are, right? So, yeah,
mhm.
and you know, that's sort of, it has to be at the forefront, and we can't forget it. And sometimes that's really difficult to treat the
Yeah.
mitochondria.
Yeah,
Um,
that's just it can be, but I think the way we package it is like, anytime that we're improving inflammation, oxidative stress, improving the way
right.
cells function, you're
Reducing
helping
reactive oxygen species, getting rid of oxidative
yeah,
stress, having people sleep more, that's improving mitochondrial function. We're
yeah.
taking the stress
But
off the mitochondria.
it's a hard discussion. I'm gonna say it's a hard discussion, but it's like, hey, I came here because I'm tired. Why are
Yeah.
you talking about mitochondrial membranes and
Yeah.
complex 3 and why cytochrome? You're just like, okay, you know what, fine. We're helping you get some energy, get some rest,
Right.
and recover. And people see that. So that's super important as well. So now that we understand like the importance of mitochondria, I think the next thing I really want to go into is mitochondrial dysfunction. Because I think that's where, and it doesn't take a lot. You do a simple Google search, you're going to see that mitochondrial function is implicated in like every chronic disease.
Yeah. Everything.
It's all there. But how, and just so we can kind of have that discussion and educate people that are listening, how does mitochondrial dysfunction contribute to these chronic diseases and inflammation, all these things that just go bad for us?
So first of all, you're right. And I even talked about, like I said, you can take a cancer cell and take a mitochondria from a normal cell and put it into a cancer cell and make it normal. So we really do know that mitochondria are even at the root of that. And we used to not know that. Really, that's a pretty recent development that we've learned that mitochondria are even at the are responsible for cancer cells forming and propagating. But what happens when mitochondria go wrong? Well, remember, as they're producing energy, as they're going through this oxidative phosphorylation process. So when you make energy, there's different ways of getting energy, but it all goes through the oxidative phosphorylation. And that in that process of oxidative phosphorylation, as these electrons are transported down to make energy, to make ATP, some of the byproducts of these reactive oxygen species, which we talked about, right? Superoxides, hydrogen peroxide. And when the mitochondria becomes dysfunctional, it's like kind of revving up. It's like a motor that's going too hard. It's going to produce excessive reactive oxygen species. And when those excessive reactive oxygen species build up enough that I can't handle them any longer, because our body has all these now ways to get rid of the reactive oxygen species. We have superoxide dismutase. That gets rid of the superoxides. We have catalase and glutathione, and that gets rid of these reactive oxygen species. But if I'm overwhelm those systems, then what happens? Then I have these reactive oxygen species, and what do? They actually start damaging things like the protein and lipid membranes, and ultimately even the DNA. So we actually start seeing what we call lipid peroxidation in the membranes. It's almost like the cell becomes sort of shrinked, and damaged. And you can see that in some markers that we see these high levels of lipid peroxidation. That some markers that show that. So that's a big problem. And you can take more antioxidants, but it's usually to the point where if you can't control the mitochondria, then excess antioxidants really aren't going to help. The other thing is that now as that wears out and my mitochondria start to get more and more damaged, then they just can't make ATP anymore. So
Mhm.
once they aren't making ATP anymore, I start getting more and more and more fatigued. All I have is these reactive oxygen species. And
Mhm.
then these damaged mitochondria, remember, they have as we talked about, they're their own little bacteria. And they actually have their own mitochondrial DNA. It came only from your mother. So you only have one copy. So if there's a little problem with it, because you have two copies of most things, right? But mitochondria not. We've got this one copy of mitochondrial DNA that we got from our mothers. So as these damaged mitochondria start releasing these mitochondrial DNA, which is kind of foreign in a sense, they start activating these inflammatory pathways, particularly something called the NLRP3 inflammasome. And that really starts causing this low-grade chronic inflammation, what we call inflammaging. So first of all, reactive oxygen species start damaging the cell membrane, then the mitochondria get damaged. They basically release this DNA, which is sort of foreign, creates this inflammatory process. And then that's sort of the end game. Now I'm not making ATP. I have chronic inflammation. I have high levels of reactive oxygen species, and these damaged mitochondria get less and less and less functional. And all I have now is these dysfunctional mitochondria. And now, once I have dysfunctional mitochondria, right? Go back to what caused cancer. Even these dysfunctional mitochondria create a senescent cell or a zombie cell. So the cells stop dividing, but stay metabolically active. They keep secreting these substances that are bad for us, leading to neurodegenerative diseases, cancers, cardiovascular diseases, and metabolic diseases. So all starts at this overactive mitochondrial state, producing more oxidative species, reactive oxygen species, and then all kind of downhill from there.
Yeah, it's really bad. So the way like I said, I like taking all this and the analogy. I'm a big on analogies, Doc.
Yeah.
And it's just because we have to be able to explain it, and the
I
way
find
we
the best
explain
way
it
for
to
you
people,
to teach. You're good at it.
It really is. So I always look at this process that Dr. Yurth talked about as if you're selling tickets to a concert. And you just, you know what? I'm going to sell all the tickets, and I only have so many seats, but we're going to keep selling tickets. And people start showing up for the concert.
Perfect,
and then more
yeah.
people start showing up, and then there's no more seats, and they're standing on the walls, and now they're standing on
pissed
the
off.
stage. Oh, they're pissed off, right? And like the musician can't even get on the stage. Now they're really upset. Now they're going to start destroying the
they're
theater.
tearing down the walls. They're beating up other people, right?
It's a riot. It's a pure riot. It's pure chaos. Until eventually, it's just like, you know what? We're shutting this concert down. That's it.
Perfect. I love that.
Everyone
I love
out.
that analogy.
But the problem is we ain't leaving. We're here. And this is where, when we get into some of the things we can do about it, that's where you have to restore that mitochondrial function and kind of get rid of the bad ones and call the cops.
Right. Get rid of the damaged mitochondria, start building new mitochondria, start controlling the reactive oxygen species, start reducing the inflammation, right? So it's a big process once it starts.
It's huge. And it's not easy to do, and it's a consistent process. It can't be like, oh, I took some CoQ10 for a month, I'm good now, right? And it's
exactly.
Like, no, it's ongoing, right? But again, and this is where, and man, it'd be a whole podcast on redox, but I also feel there's a level where you don't want to overdo it,
right?
Where
that's a big problem too, right? You know, we talk about that a lot, because we are that people love their antioxidants, and you're right, antioxidants are good, right? But we can take too many antioxidants. Because if I have no reactive oxygen species, they actually are a cue to my mitochondria to get tougher and stronger. If I have none of them, I actually start to have secondary problems, and that can actually lead to things too. So you can't have too much what we call reductive stress. As you said, we have this balance of redox, too much reductive stress. So those of you who are taking your antioxidants, like billions of them, and I have a lot of patients doing this, I'm sure you do, taking billions of antioxidants all the time, it's not a good thing either. So cycling antioxidants, particularly not using them after exercise, right? When we want a little oxidative stress, those kinds of things are really important. So it's not, I'll just take more antioxidants and everything will be better. You really have to balance everything.
Yeah, too much of a good thing,
right,
if you will, when it comes to that.
Right, and everything.
Yeah. So now that we've thoroughly terrified everyone about mitochondrial dysfunction, what are some of the signs, symptoms of mitochondrial dysfunction that people might overlook or may not even think about their mitochondria if they're experiencing certain things?
I think it's, the number one complaint, which is probably the biggest complaint you and I see people walk in with, right, is just fatigue. I'm always tired. And it doesn't seem like if I sleep, it helps. I am just always tired. I wake up tired. The rest of the day, I'm tired. I can't if I take a nap, it doesn't help me at all. So that's probably the biggest thing. And, I think if I think of the one complaint, besides probably being fat, that people come into our office with, it's being tired. So that's number one. Number two is sort of exercise intolerance, because I need more energy when I'm exercising. So if I try and exercise and I get sort of, like everybody else seems okay and I'm a little more short of breath than I should be, or my heart rate goes up a little higher than it should, those are signs that maybe my mitochondria can't keep up with that ATP production I need to increase my exercise. And then if you remember, one of the most mitochondrial dense tissues, it's our brain. So cognitive fog, right? I just have brain fog or difficulty concentration, kind of an ADD or, sort of almost behaviors. Can't focus, can't concentrate. I'm in brain fog all the time. So I think those are probably the most common, but then there's ones you don't think about quite as much. Like temperature regulation issues, feeling too hot or too cold, partly because of that thyroid dysfunction that occurs when the mitochondrial membrane is not working well, but partly simply because of this inability to balance ATP production. So sometimes those people who are always cold or always hot being the mitochondria might be a little too revved up, like you were talking about, selling too many tickets, or too cold, meaning I just don't have enough energy to be able to tolerate that, right? And that could be thyroid, but and the thyroid might stem back to the mitochondria. Sleep disturbances are huge. They're a big sign of mitochondrial dysfunction. So when people aren't sleeping, we go to all these things, but are we looking at fixing the mitochondria? Because that oxidative stress can create these sleep disturbances too, because of this dysfunction at the brain level. So I think that's probably, those are the biggest. But I think other things you don't look at: GI issues, headaches. And the one that I didn't really think about until I was at a lecture actually a week ago, and it was talking about liver. And did you know liver is really one of the most mitochondrial dense tissues? Like I didn't really think about the liver in that realm, but it is. Like I think about muscles and heart and brain as being super mitochondrial dense, but I don't really think about the liver. And so when you have people unexplained liver enzyme elevations, that can actually be sign of mitochondrial issues. And by addressing the mitochondria, then we can actually help the liver. So that's another one. And then, last thing we talked about was the hormones. So what if I put my patients on hormones, but they just don't seem to responding as well as they should? Like they look balanced to me, but they're not responding well. It's like they don't get the extra, boost that testosterone should give them, or they can't build muscles, even though I have ample testosterone. That's mitochondrial issues too. So it kind of comes down to almost everything we see. And as you talked about, every disease probably does stem to bacteria, of these little bacteria, these little mitochondria. But I think we've got to keep them in mind for all these things that walk into our office, and that probably it needs to be first and foremost on what we're focusing on. When we're looking at this, COVID was a huge, brought all this to light for us, right? Because we had all these people after COVID who were miserable, and that's because COVID really knocked out mitochondria. So they had horrible brain fog, horrible fatigue, horrible sleep disturbances, horrible hormone disturbances, infertility. That's all because of the mitochondrial damage from this virus.
It's amazing. I think the one that I would add is metabolic dysfunction, because mitochondria have such an implication in
can't control glucose, insulin metabolism. Absolutely critical. So I don't think we've left anything off that list. So it kind of encompasses.
No, it's like everything.
What is mitochondrial dysfunction? And I think people, a lot of times they think about these things as normal aging, right? But normal aging is mitochondrial dysfunction. So
it really is.
And we
part
should
of it, right?
normally age. We should be able to stay young and healthy and and fit.
That's our goal. That's the goal. Now, this is the challenging part, because as you're going down our checklist here, and it's like, wait a minute, okay, I'm fatigued, brain fog, difficulty recovering from exercise, and gaining weight. And most people listening to that is like, or body temperature, or especially with the cold hands, cold feet, body temperature dysregulation, you start thinking like, that sounds like hypothyroidism. That sounds like low testosterone. That sounds like adrenal dysfunction. And so even as a practitioner, you're like, okay, if someone comes in with that, and the labs show it, I mean, obviously you're going to dive at that end of the pool because it's right there. But I think you hit the key point, is that, okay, if you come in and it's like, okay, you sounds and quack, walks like a duck, looks like low testosterone, low thyroid, you treat that, and the person's
exactly, you treat it, but you go back and still work on the mitochondria, right? So we don't then stop there. We go back and we think, why might have this thyroid dysfunction or hormone dysfunction started? Because it may have started at the mitochondrial level, and now we've given them the hormones, but so everything's feeling better, but we didn't fix the mitochondria, and the mitochondria are creating all these other underlying problems. So I think that's where we fail sometimes, is we're like, oh, we got our patient all better, they're optimized, everything looks good, and we don't go back to, I think that's where you and I practice cellular medicine, not really functional medicine, right? So functional medicine would say, fix the thyroid, fix the hormones. Cellular medicine would say, go back and say, at the cell level, what started that process.
And walk it back, because, okay, maybe if we go there, maybe you don't have to take as high of a dose of
you
something.
Might need as much, exactly.
And that's going to be really cool stuff. So no, it's fascinating, but it can get, confusing, and I think that's important for people to know. It's like, okay, we want to get you feeling better, but we also want to get to the root cause, because outside of, okay, we get older, yes, you need to stay on your hormones, but especially if some of our younger patients, it's like, wait a minute, why do you have a
20-year-old walking in with low testosterone, right?
Right. Well,
especially, and that's why we saw that with COVID so much. Like these guys, after COVID, walking in with these really low hormone levels.
So this is a good segue, because obviously aging is going to accelerate mitochondrial decline. part of getting older, right? But what else? What environmental factors, what epigenetic factors rather, can kind of speed that decline or dysfunction up?
It's hard because so many of these things are way out of our control. I think it's maybe one of our hardest parts of our job is we're living in this really toxic world. And we can't really put people in bubbles. We can't really, as much as I think we need to work with, the food industry and all, and everything to try and get rid of these things, it's hard. And so if you look at things like pesticides and heavy metals and air pollution, those are all really toxic to our mitochondria. So they're putting a big stress on mitochondria. So, and those are hard things to get rid of, right? I mean, we can certainly reduce them. We can watch our plastics, for BPAs and things like that. But even using filters, everybody needs to make sure they have good reverse osmosis filters in their water for their water sources. But it's really hard to get people away from that. And so sometimes we have to try and work around that as much as we can while we're reducing exposures. But other things we kind of don't think about is, elevated cortisol actually damages mitochondrial function. So chronic stress that we're all under, that chronic psychological stress with high cortisol. So high cortisol does impair mitochondrial function. Vice versa, impaired mitochondrial function can disrupt cortisol metabolism, but vice versa as well. So we really need to look at people's stress levels there too. And then being sedentary. We're all sitting at our desks all day. And unfortunately, my mitochondria need some stimulation to say, oh, get tougher, get stronger, make more mitochondria. So by far the biggest assistance to making more healthy mitochondria is stressing your mitochondria with some exercise. So if we're sedentary all day long, we're going to have less mitochondria. So it's one of the things that happens as we age. We know that the sheer number of mitochondria reduces. If I can exercise at a high enough level, on a regular basis. And I'm guilty of this too, because I get so busy sitting at my desk, right? But having a treadmill at your desk, standing up, I have this, great kind of leaning chair that I can just lean against when I'm, but at least moving during the day, because like you and I work out a lot, but during the day, lots of times we're stuck in these, we're trying to see patients fast and we're, writing, and it's hard to keep ourselves moving. So that's really important for all of us to really remember. Alcohol is horrible. And I hate to say it, even a little bit of alcohol is horrible because alcohol directly damages mitochondrial membranes, directly. So it's almost impossible to drink alcohol and have normal mitochondria. Even if you're doing you're going out for this binge, on Saturdays, you go out for 4 drinks. Every time you're doing that, you're damaging mitochondrial membranes. And, the good thing is I think when we're young, we tolerate that a little bit better. So all of us who, I've got 5 kids, I've got college age kids. It's hard because it's such a part of their culture, right? Even if you tell them this is really bad for you, and then you get to be my age and it's a little bit more like, wow, I'm not going to do that risk anymore. So the hope is at a younger age, maybe we can tolerate that stuff a little bit better. But I can tell you, if there's so many other options now besides drinking alcohol, to make yourself, there's, all these herbals that almost act like, alcohol to you. So there's other things you can do, and put in that smoking, mitochondrial toxins in smoking. Anybody who's smoking, it's funny. I have a patient who is so concerned about her health. She does everything. And, and she smokes. She's like, I don't know why my labs aren't perfect. Because you smoke. She's like, I do everything else right. So that shouldn't be a big deal. I'm like, it is. You cannot undo the bad effects and the toxicities of smoking.
Huge.
And then radiation, UV exposures, those kinds of things, important. And then disrupted circadian rhythms, which all of us have. You and I were just talking about sleep, but that not being in the light during the day, right? You should get first morning light. You should get light at noon. You should see the evening light. So even if it means walking outside of your office a few times a day, you need to be exposed to light and then dark at night, because that really disrupts mitochondrial function too. So those are things that are in our control to some degree and out of our control to some degree. Right. And then infections. Right.
That's huge.
We talked about COVID, Epstein-Barr virus, which probably got activated with COVID, but infections really deplete the mitochondria and directly damage mitochondria. So it is hard because a lot of the damage to mitochondria is out of our control, and we have to really take control where we can. We have to exercise, we have to sleep, we have to not drink, we have to not smoke. Those are all important pieces.
They're huge. Now, the one I would add to that is diet. just
Right,
because
of
again,
course.
oh my god, processed food, sugar, all the
Right, sugar
inflammatory
is
foods.
horrible. Probably a
Oh my goodness.
Mediterranean diet is best.
Hmm.
When you look at, is high protein great for the mitochondria? You probably need a balance of some carbs to keep this glycolytic pathway a little more active. So those of
Hmm.
you who love your really high protein diet, that's great. You need to modify that, making sure you're still getting enough carbs sometimes to keep the metabolic flexibility. Or those people who love
Absolutely.
carnivore, probably that's getting us out of metabolic or keto diets. Those are things probably that should be cycled a little bit. I'm very much a fan of, you always have to have high protein, but sometimes you need to balance that with maybe increasing the carb intake periodically as well.
And having that. And you mentioned it earlier. I read this article a few years back that talked about how we have the symbiotic relationship with mitochondria. Like literally, they're like essentially we're independent contractors for our mitochondria. It's like you're here to give me fuel, and I will give you energy in return. Right? That's
Yeah.
our trade off. Right?
Yeah. I'll
And,
stimulate you, help you survive, but you need to give me the fuel. Yeah.
yeah, you gotta feed me, right, and the right thing so I can function. And then the second part to that is, and again, we're going to talk a little bit more about NAD pathways a little bit, not too deep into it, but just how that relates to mitochondria. Is I do know, if I recall, it do takes 2 molecules of NAD to break down 1 molecule of alcohol.
Right. Exactly.
That is a lot, and we talked about
That's, yeah. So you're sucking
it's
down
a
a lot
lot.
of NAD.
Oh, right, and mitochondria and NAD have that relationship as well. And then I think it's if it's 2 for alcohol, it might be 3 or 4 for an opiate. So a lot of people that are on like the hydrocodones and all these different medications, oxycodones rather, they're blazing through their NAD, and the mitochondria suffer for that as well. And so it makes you think about some of the side effects of opiates maybe related to mitochondrial dysfunction if you think about that pathway. So it's fascinating, man, and scary at the same time.
It is scary. And people are taking these NAD supplements and things like that, and then they're drinking alcohol, which is sucking away your NAD. So it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's the snowball effect. Snowball effect. So now that we've established, we know mitochondrial dysfunction is bad. We know some of the signs and symptoms of it, some of the things that cause it. If someone thinks like, man, this sounds a lot like me, I've been checking my hormones, my thyroid and all of that, but a lot of people may be thinking like, is there a way to test for mitochondrial function? Are there any clinical markers that can actually look at it? So the big question is, and that's hard because it's almost like testing for NAD, where NAD is so hard to test for because it's
Right.
always kind of oxidizing, reducing. And so what are you actually looking for? But are there any tests that can accurately kind of help us assess mitochondrial function?
So it's really hard to do that. So I think
Mhm.
there's some indirect things we can do. Like you can look at lactate levels, what's called a lactate pyruvate ratio. You could do those things. Those are hard to measure, really, and just all of us kind of walking around in a research setting, a little easier to do. You can look at organic acids. So urinary organic acid testing can sort of reveal sort of metabolic blocks. Right. So we look at urinary organic acids. You and I can sort of figure out, oh, there's a block here, which will tell us something's going wrong with the mitochondrial pathways. You talked about NAD, NADH. The problem with that, and there's people who are measuring NADs, it's ridiculous because you can't tell what's going on inside the mitochondria. The cytoplasm serum have completely different NAD, NADH ratios than the mitochondria does, so they're really worthless. I always look at oxidative stress markers like 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine, which you can measure in urine, is a marker of oxidative damage to DNA. When you have a lot of oxidative damage to DNA going on, typically there's something wrong at the mitochondria, at mitochondrial level. I think the other thing is looking at people who don't have metabolic flexibility. So what you can do is, just looking at CGMs, and you see people who really, if they eat any carbohydrates at all, they get this humongous, jump in glucose. This metabolic inflexibility can oftentimes be signs of mitochondrial dysfunction. So, it's like they eat something that should be, maybe have a little bit of a response to their glucose, and it jumps up to 190, right? Sometimes there's issues there if they continuously are doing that. So that sort of tells you a little bit about metabolic flexibility assessments. And then VO2 max measuring. I mean, I'm a big fan of measuring VO2 max, right? So you're measuring max and oxygen consumption during exercise. If you don't have adequate mitochondrial function, one of the first things that suffers is your VO2 max. And I think a lot of us are incorporating VO2 maxes into kind of our longevity marker testing because we know it is a really good marker for things like mitochondrial function and longevity. And a lot of it's just you and I looking at muscle fatigue. Right. So if somebody's really, like their hang tests, things like that, just how long can they hang on a bar? If it's like 10 seconds, they just don't have the ability to incorporate more mitochondria to do that. You look at general anti-inflammatory, general inflammatory markers like C-reactive proteins. So, I think lots of times it's putting together a whole picture. But like you and I, lots of times just can discern it from what the patient tells us. So lots of times there's not going to be a single definitive perfect test. I know people want that. There is this test called Mito-me that somebody put out that really is not very accurate for looking at mitochondrial function. You could do biopsies of muscle. That's probably the best thing, but we're not going to do that in our clinical practices, right? So I think we have to look at these things. Are oxidative stress markers high? Is the VO2 max low? Do people have poor metabolic flexibility? Those are kind of nice little easy things that we can measure in our practices. I really love, so Dr. Dane Goodenow came up with what's called a Prodrome Scan. And the Prodrome Scan actually uses fatty acid markers to look at all sorts of things like your peroxisomal function, your mitochondrial function. So there's these very key ratios when you look at fatty acids. And that will tell you that there's disturbances in mitochondrial function. So there's really three fatty acids that make up the mitochondrial membranes: linoleic, arachidonic, and adrenic acid. And you should always have high linolenic, a little bit lower arachidonic acid, and a little bit lower adrenic. And when those ratios are disrupted, it's telling you something's wrong, like impaired mitochondrial elongase enzyme or reduced peroxisomal mitochondrial connections. So, or just a dysfunction in the mitochondrial fatty acid metabolism. So I love that test. It's a really hard test to interpret, so a lot of doctors don't like it because it is difficult to interpret. You have to learn what are these ratios, what are the right ratios. But I love Prodrome scans. To me, it is by far my best marker that I've restored mitochondrial health when I can see improvement in these fatty acid ratios in people. And there's all these kind of ratios you can look at, like adrenic acid to linoleic acid, and adrenic to arachidonic. So as you learn that test, it's super helpful to figure out the energy producing capability of the mitochondria. But it's a hard test to learn how to interpret, but it's really useful. So those of you guys who find a doctor who uses Prodrome scans, that can be really helpful. I don't know if are you using that much, Greg?
Not yet. After this weekend, though, I'm going to start getting into it because I feel like it's been kind of like, I feel like I'm a slow adopter, right? I was like, I keep hearing about this methylene blue, man. I don't know, man. Blue dye in my patients. What are you talking about? And then finally, I come around, right? And so I was slow to adopt GLP-1s. I was so slow. I was like, you can more just work.
I think it's a good thing because I think one of the biggest problems that we all have is jumping on bandwagons before we really know are things really the right way to go. But that's both testing. I was just talking that with this morning. We were talking about cancer lab testing, and are any of them really good? We don't know. So we jump on these bandwagons, and then more data starts coming out going, oh, actually, it wasn't that good, So I think it's good to be a slow adopter.
I've learnned that because I was not that way in the beginning, and I have a lot of very expensive devices around this office that I'm like, oh God, I should have waited before I bought that. So, and it just makes sense, and I want to be well educated in a lot of these things too. So plasmalogens and the Prodrome scan are next on my list. I definitely want to get because I think that it can benefit so many people just improving cellular function and I see what it can do with some of the neurocognitive things. It's like, okay, I need to get on this and learn about it. But
it is for me become one of my mainstays in really figuring people out.
Oh, that's amazing. So one of the labs that you can get from a more traditional lab is CoQ10. Like you can measure CoQ10. Do you think that could be beneficial for us?
I definitely think that's beneficial, right? CoQ10 is an absolutely critical cofactor for that oxidative phosphorylation to go on, for this these steps, these four complexes to balance these electrons down the chain and kind of finally come out with ATP. So if CoQ10 is low or too high, right, that can give you, if somebody's taking it, the too high doesn't mean much, but if it's very low, it means that they've used it up. It means the mitochondria have used up CoQ10 trying to actually keep up with this ATP production. So, and even B vitamins and magnesium can be signs of that in the same way, because those are also critical cofactors. So when you see very low levels of all of these things that are critical cofactors to mitochondrial function, CoQ10, B vitamins, magnesium, those are all things that might clue you in that something is going wrong at the mitochondria. And obviously replacing them helps, right? So it helps the mitochondria. So, but thinking about, so giving those back to help support the mitochondria, but maybe you need even more than that too.
Okay, awesome. So the way I think, Doc, is that I'm always thinking about, the naturopathic therapeutic order, and I believe that anyone that's in cellular medicine or even functional medicine hopefully thinks the same way. I like to think it's like lifestyle, supplements, peptides, fancy, off the radar. You have to go to Bulgaria to do this kind of thing, right? So we want to start at the baseline though, right? And so let's think about things that are more lifestyle driven or things that people can implement almost immediately or just very simply to improve mitochondrial function, what are some of the ones that you believe have a large impact or a really amazing impact on mitochondrial function?
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to be surprised because it's exercise by
Yeah.
far number one, right?
Yep.
Particularly either HIIT training and resistance training. Those are going to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis a lot more. Although, at least some zone 2 training probably helps as well. But really, what really stimulates this expression of what's called PGC alpha, which is kind of the master regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis, is HIIT training and resistance training. So you've got to strength training, you've got to do short burst interval training, and then maybe 1 or 2 days a week add in some zone 2. But that seems to be a little bit less critical for mitochondrial biogenesis than the other two. I also, so that's a really, and I think if you don't do that, it's going to be really hard to get the mitochondria healthy. And then, so that comes, we'll talk about this when we talk about other things you can do, but what do we do with the people who can't exercise, right? They're hurt, they're too sick, they're too unwell. Their mitochondria are so dysfunctional that there's no way I'm going to get them to do any training. That's hard. That's why sometimes we have to use some of these more, bigger tools like peptides to try and help them get back. But if any, even if your patient can do nothing but get up and walk a little bit, trying to get them moving is so critical. I think that trying to get them on a really good diet, I really encourage for mitochondrial function, a Mediterranean diet, but with a good protein intake as well, right? So you need a diet that has a lot of B vitamins in it. You need choline. So choline gets forgotten. And really, we know that for brain mitochondrial function that you need animal-based choline. So I hate to say for all you vegetarians and vegans, but you need animal-based choline for the brain. And so really eggs are by far the best source there. So I'm trying to get my patients to eat a ton of eggs when they have mitochondrial dysfunction, try and get the choline levels up, make sure they're getting a lot of B vitamins, which comes primarily from your meats, right? And so that diet quality is really critical. And you already talked about getting rid of this processed foods, the sugars and things like that. And then really training metabolic flexibility. We want to be able to train our mitochondria to have glucose and utilize it, but also be able to switch to other energy sources. So that's where intermittent fasting or even just time-restricted eating, where I go 18 hours between meals, or carb cycling, or going through periods of ketogenesis, or taking exogenous ketones. Those are all things that you can do that really help train that metabolic flexibility so that I'm not always utilizing glycolysis, not always glucose. I can use other sources to make energy, and that's really good for my mitochondria. So that's where long periods of fast, right? We don't have a glucose store. We go back into our more utilizing ketones, or doing that, that ketogenic period, diet periods. Other things you can do are cold and heat, right? So saunas and cold plunges. I hate cold plunges. I keep trying to find reasons that they're bad. So far, I'm having trouble. But I love saunas. I love heat, but not cold. But it's good, right? So those little stressors, we talked about how a little stress is good. Now those little stressors are going to be really useful to stimulate mitochondrial function.
Okay.
Red light, like photobiomodulation, usually between I think it's 650 and 850 nanometer light, enhances the electron transport chain. So that's an easy thing to do. Sleep, stress management, we talked about, trying to eliminate the toxins. Those are all by far the very first things you hit at.
Okay. That's good. There's all good ones there as well. So no cold, and you mentioned heat. So we're thinking more dry sauna, kind of thing as well. Good things as well. Mentioned intermittent fasting. I did a great
cold
podcast.
plunge, Greg?
Begrudgingly, and it's just I'm also not a big cold person, but I do feel better when I get out of it.
Really?
It's just the initial start of it where it's why am I doing this? This is the most insane thing in the world. We migrated to warmer climates to not have to do this, right?
It's yeah, you live in Arizona.
It's why, it's I'm not doing this, right? But I make myself do it at least. I try to go once a week, and
yeah, right now, I try once a week, but we probably should be doing it more. I even that cold shower thing, where, okay, turn your shower on for 1 minute at the end of the shower and take a cold shower. I preach it. I just can't quite do it.
Yeah, no, I get it. I was I'm never going to say don't do it, but I'm kind of like you. I try to find a million reasons why not to. Just can't right now.
I'm constantly, every night I research what new articles might have come out that show that it's not good for me.
Not a ton.
I'll keep working on that project.
I did, the one I did appreciate because I used to work out and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go cold plunge right after because it
Yeah,
just makes
right,
sense,
which is
right?
not good.
Turns out that's not
I
good,
used to do
right?
that all the time too. I'd go straight
Mm.
from workout to a cold plunge and actually undoes a lot of the stress that you wanted from your workouts, right? You
I
actually
know.
want at
You're
least
like,
4 hours in between.
and it's like, dang it. Okay, so we
So you
can't do
can
that.
sauna afterwards, but not cold plunge.
Not cold plunge. Learned that. And right now we're kind of lucky as the weather. We're recording this in March. In the last 2 months, I've been able to cold plunge in the backyard. Like, oh, this is cold enough.
Yeah.
Literally doing a Google search, like, how cold does it really have to be, right? Because 40, I think we're like 47,
Yeah,
48
actually, I think
degree
it's
weather.
under 50, right?
Yeah, anything
Yeah, it
under
actually
50.
doesn't have to be that cold. I mean, under 50 actually does do something.
That's true. And then I negotiate with myself, like, 55. Like, this thermometer is not accurate. It's really 47.
Maybe if you go out naked in 55.
Yeah, we work it through. We work it through. So shifting gears a little bit to supplementation, right? And this one's fascinating to me because there are so many supplements that can improve mitochondrial function. Some have research behind it. There's a ton out there that claim to improve mitochondrial function, right? And there's a lot. But do you have some favorites or something that's like, hey, you know what? If you had to pick these 3 to 5 supplements for mitochondrial function, these are the ones. Do you have some go-tos?
Well, let me talk about a couple that people are throwing in a lot that I do have some questions about. One is NAD precursors like NMN and NR and even these NAD infusions. Because one of the things we've learned, and you hear me preach this all the time, Greg, but one of the things we've learned is that we actually don't make less NAD as we age. We actually just use it up more. So if you look, the main source of NAD is from what's called the salvage pathway, which comes from nicotinamide. And if you're doing all these precursors, ultimately it comes down to they turn into nicotinamide, which turns into NAD. So nicotinamide is probably the best precursor for NAD. But the reason I'm losing it is upregulation of some of the enzymes that are depleting it, including something called CD38, something called NNMT, which actually adds a methyl group to the nicotinamide, and it sort of sucks down methyl groups, which was one of the downsides to it. But it makes a product called 1-methyl-nicotinamide. 1-methyl-nicotinamide actually goes, oh, I need to go help the mitochondria. So that's actually our body's way. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm losing NAD because I've got these very high levels of NNMT, which are elevated when you've got any disease or are older. So we have these higher levels. So the 1-MNA gets produced, it goes back and actually acts like NAD. The problem is if you keep throwing NAD into the system, then the 1-MNA doesn't keep up any longer and it starts forming a toxic metabolite called 4-pyridone. So if you keep just throwing NAD into a system over and over and over again, you will eventually make too much 4-pyridone, which is why we've seen that high levels of niacin supplementation or NR or NMN likely lead to cardiovascular diseases, metabolic diseases, even cancers, is because of this high levels of 4-pyridones. So we have to be really careful with these and use them a lot more judiciously. I'm not going to say you should never take NAD or its precursors, but you want to use them sporadically when you really need them. And you want to block the things that are draining them, like CD38, which you can block with something called apigenin, or block NNMT with something called 1-methyl-nicotinamide, which is the way the body does it, right? So the body produces 1-methyl-nicotinamide. Let's give 1-methyl-nicotinamide, block the NNMT. So that's actually my favorite way of raising NAD levels, is not to use something that I'm not sure where it's going or what's happening to it, but to use what the body's doing, which is 1-methyl-nicotinamide, and then blocking CD38 with some apigenin. So actually, I love 1-methyl-nicotinamide, and we get a lot. People. I hear a lot of feedback from my patients when I put them on 1-MNA before their workouts that their energy is markedly improved, which tells me they really have higher levels of this enzyme. But when you get to be in your 60s, you will have high levels of this enzyme. So if you're giving yourself NAD, you're risking problems. So I really like 1-MNA or 1-methyl-nicotinamide. But if I were to say my and then you've got to make sure you have enough B vitamins. You have to make sure you have enough CoQ10, all those basics, right, that you actually just absolutely have to have for mitochondrial function. But if you were to ask me like my number one go-to kind of for everything, and I mentioned this in my talk this weekend, it's actually ketones. So I love ketones, and it's primarily beta-hydroxybutyrate that is the important ketone that we make. When we fast, we make beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, but it's really the beta-hydroxybutyrate that's sort of the key to energy metabolism, enhancing mitochondrial function. So remember, when we go into ketosis, those ketones they use half as much NAD to make ATP. So I'm much more efficient at making ATP, and I spare this NAD. So it's a great way of raising NAD levels in a very safe fashion. But the ketones also, so they're much more energy efficient than glucose. They produce more ATP, and there's a lot less metabolic waste because we don't have to go through glycolysis. So you don't get as many oxidative free radicals produced when you're using ketones. So I've kind of, sort of successfully fixed my mitochondria by just utilizing this different source. But add to that they upregulate on their own. So when beta-hydroxybutyrate is high, the body upregulates on its own to a homeostatic level the antioxidant enzymes like superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase. So instead of just dumping those in, I can actually upregulate them on my own by just taking ketones. And then we also know they activate this peroxisome proliferation activator receptor gamma, or PGC1. And that's what signals, we talked about that, that's what exercise does. So it signals mitochondrial biogenesis. So they're kind of everything, right? They're making me make more mitochondria. They're making my mitochondria healthier. They're making me more ATP, and they directly suppress inflammation. Directly. So they directly inhibit this inflammasome. So I have less inflammation. Remember that whole cascade we talked about, what goes wrong with the mitochondria? I just gave you one thing that fixed all of those things. So I use ketones kind of ongoing throughout my day. Like I drink them during the day to sort of keep my energy levels up, keep my inflammation down. By far, in any of my sick patients, they have on high dose ketones, like my dementia patients, my Parkinson's patients, my long COVID patients, high doses of ketones, because it really will benefit, and supports fat oxidation. So you can actually switch between these fuel sources better. So if you go back to eating carbohydrates, your body can utilize them better. So I really, again, this is one of the reasons fasting is so good is ketones. Well, I can give them exogenously and get the same, if not better effects, because I actually get more ketones or more of the beta-hydroxybutyrate than I do with fasting. So I love ketones. And then the other one, which I know you probably use a ton of, is creatine. And I think, from your bodybuilding world, creatine's huge, right? But it's so essential for mitochondrial. So I always think about it from muscle energy production, but the reason it helps muscle so much is because of its critical role in mitochondrial function. So when you take creatine, it actually makes you generate more ATP, and so you can quickly get more demand, energy demand to your muscles. And then this creatine phosphate actually acts as a rapid ATP buffer, so that actually you don't overuse your ATP. It's used more appropriately. And that's because it facilitates what's called ATP transferase. So you maintain these sort of high energy levels of ATP inside the cell where it's needed. So, creatine is also a master antioxidant, but it's, again, when you look at antioxidants, this is an antioxidant you can't take too much of. It's a homeostatic antioxidant. It's not going to over antioxidize you. And it protects mitochondrial DNA. So everybody needs creatine. If you exercise, if you have brain fog, everybody needs creatine. It is so incredibly critical. And, at least 5 grams a day. And if you're exercising hard or sick, you might need more than that. So I think that when you throw ketones and creatine and maybe 1-methylnicotinamide into the mix, you've really supported a lot of the things that are leading to mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's a pretty easy regimen to do, I mean, I love the ketones, honestly.
No, it is, though, because you hit one of the most important things that I love talking about is, I love supplements that can do multiple things, right? You need to have more than one job, right? And when it comes to
supplements that work like the body does, right? That's our body's rescue, is ketones. So when there's mitochondrial dysfunction, the body rescues it with ketones. When we're sick, that's why when you're sick, you don't want to eat, because your body actually wants you in a ketotic state. Or if you're, look at an injured animal. What does an injured animal do? It stops eating, because ketones are come into play, and they help heal. They make more energy. They stop inflammation. So an animal will stop eating when it's injured because it's very well aware that ketosis is actually beneficial to healing. So that's why, you don't want to eat. So the body really wants ketones, so we can give it ketones. And so that's how our body does things. We make creatine. These are natural substances to the body. So let's give the body back the way it does things.
Yep. You've clearly never met my French bulldog, who will, I'm sorry, if she lost all of her paws, I believe she would drag her body.
She would still eat.
Drag herself to the
we have sort of now trained them a little differently than what they were in the wild. before.
Yeah. It's like, I'm gonna eat. Just lay on my belly and put it in my mouth there, sir. You got to make this happen. You got to make this happen.
I know. And then when they stop eating, we just try and force feed them because we feel so bad. They're like, oh my
I know.
God,
It's like,
eat.
what's wrong with you?
My
Why
dog
you
was
not
at the end of her life. The only thing she would eat, I never go to McDonald's, right? But I kept looking for things she would eat. And oddly, a McDonald's hamburger was the only thing she would eat. So I'd stop every day at McDonald's and get her.
Oh, man. She was like, look, I got to get this Big Mac in here before I get out of here. One of the other supplements that I really like is alpha-lipoic acid.
Yeah. Another critical, I think everybody needs alpha-lipoic acid, honestly.
Yeah.
Maybe not if you're really young, but if you're working out a lot, definitely. If you are stressed, definitely. If you're older, definitely.
Yeah. It's one, before I went down this pathway, I used to go to, it was some supplement store out here, and this lady, man, she's the best. She's like, oh man, you got to get this alpha-lipoic acid. It's the Fountain of Youth supplement, is what she called it. And I don't think she really knew all the pathways. She just knew, and she was like, oh, people take it and they feel better and their skin looks better. And then as I learned what it is, that makes sense. Mitochondrial function.
Right, and one of the things, go back to that Prodrome Scan, we're looking at the fatty acids in the membrane. That's one of the things that alpha-lipoic acid supports is some of the fatty acids in the mitochondrial membrane. So that's why it's so important. It's just for the brain.
Yeah, such an incredible one. So great list of supplements there. And let's kind of shift gears into some of the fun stuff. Well, I'd say fun stuff here. Now we got our foundation, got the lifestyle stuff. All right. So let's talk about peptides and some of these really cool compounds that we've been using and will be learning to use even more so that can benefit mitochondrial function.
Yeah.
So I want to, even though as for now it can be difficult to source, but I want to start with MOTS-c because that was the first mitochondrial peptide that I heard about. And I loved MOTS-c, still love MOTS-c, And so what made that one so effective for improving mitochondrial function?
So you and I talked about that. What if somebody can't exercise, right? Like, sometimes people are really that bad that trying to get out of bed is too much. And we can beg and plead and, do everything, but if they can't get out of bed, they can't get out of bed. So what MOTS-c is actually acts like an exercise mimetic. So, it's going to activate, we have these, when energy is low, we activate what's called AMPK. Right? And when energy is high, we activate mTOR, and when it's low, we activate AMPK. So that's kind of our cellular energy sensor. So what MOTS-c will do is activates AMPK. That tells the cell something's wrong here. There's not enough energy, right? So exercise will do the same thing, but I can't exercise. So I can give something that sort of tricks the cell into saying, oh my gosh, I got to help things out here. So when that energy sensor is detecting these low energy states, it's going to enhance insulin sensitivity, enhance glucose metabolism, and it's going to promote more mitochondria. It's going to say, okay, obviously energy is low. I need more ATP. I need better mitochondrial function. So just like exercise does, we get into this deprived energy state, the AMP gets elevated. We can do that with a pill. That's why MOTS-c used to be called exercise in a pill, right? So that's really why it's so beneficial, is it really truly does the same thing exercise does. Remember the mitochondria, we talked about they're their own beings, they have their own DNA. Well, this is it in its DNA. So this is how the mitochondria deals with the fact that it's in a bad state. It produces MOTS-c. But what if I don't have enough mitochondria to produce enough MOTS-c to heal my mitochondria? I can give it externally.
Okay. And MOTS-c was a great one as well. No,
it's and you're right. You could use it for metabolic syndrome. Helping people who have poor glucose metabolism. You can use it for exercise performance. You can use it to help the long COVIDers. It's a great peptide.
I have a couple of patients with type 1 diabetes. They loved MOTS-c.
Yeah, really. I have some patients too, or just really recalcitrant type 2 diabetes where nothing much is working. Like you have them on the GLP-1s, you have everything, and MOTS-c would really help a lot of those people.
Yeah. So one of the ones that, as a lot of things going with the FDA, can't dive into that too much. So, but as some of the peptides started being less available, then it became, what do we do now? What are the next peptides? What are the next generation things that help with mitochondrial function? So there are two that we've been using here in the office that we've had I would say some cases very good, some cases, and I would say when I say some cases, because I think people were expecting it, they were expecting to feel like MOTS-c, and it's not MOTS-c, so, and it was a little different, but the first one is Humanin. How do you like to say it? Humanin? Humanin, right? And so Humanin is another mitochondrial peptide. And I think for those who aren't familiar with that, I want to make sure people understand. We say mitochondrial peptide because they're made in the mitochondria versus the, most peptides are made in the RNA of the cell.
But so Humanin is another naturally made peptide, right? Our mitochondria make it.
Right.
And it was actually designed by a researcher, Japanese researcher, found Humanin, and he actually named it Humanin because he said it restored the human to dementia. So it's actually going to come out as a dementia treatment, and then he passed away, and people sort of lost interest in the research on it. But it is another mitochondrial-derived peptide that's going to actually have a lot of protective effects on the mitochondria. So it's not going to create the mitochondrial biogenesis that MOTS-c does as much, but it's going to preserve mitochondrial function to help the mitochondria to last longer. So it appears to be primarily most effective in neurodegenerative diseases. And that's where most of the testing has been on it and where I find it most useful. But I do find it really useful in that group of people. Small cycles, you can just do like 10-day cycles of it. But the other really cool place that we found it to be really interesting, and if you look, there's some really cool research on this, is in macular degeneration, which is also mitochondrial disease. So Humanin actually has been really helpful to some of our patients with macular degeneration, which there's not a lot of treatments for, right? So I think it's a really good peptide for brain and eyes. For that overall energy state, like MOTS-c gave, no, you're not going to see that with Humanin, but I use it a lot in my neurodegenerative people, a lot. Or if you just have, a lot of brain fog, it's really good for you.
Yeah, it's a good one as well. I think it was I think it was Dr. Newman at a conference last year, and she was discussing using Humanin for athletic performance, but it was also in this short cycle, just restoring some of that muscle function or muscle mitochondria.
Any mitochondrial peptides are going to help with performance, right? I don't find Humanin to work that well for performance. In my experience, it's not as good as SS31 or MOTS-c or 5-amino-1-MQ, some of the other peptides that are maybe more useful in that realm. But anything that supports mitochondria should theoretically at least help with exercise performance.
Yeah, we didn't see much of that, and I think that was where I don't want to say we made a mistake in the beginning when we had to kind of switch from MOTS-c. It's like, okay, let's go straight to Humanin, and we didn't have a lot of people like, oh, let me get more of that, was not the response I got. It was more of like, what else? Something different.
But use it in your neurodegenerative people, because that's where you're going to see, and it's not going to be immediate. It's going to be, you have to use it kind of ongoing. So we'll cycle it, ongoing with people. And we're seeing improvement in that group, which is really where most of the research came from it.
Yeah, indeed. And then you mentioned a little bit earlier, then there's SS31, which I think anyone that I've seen that has any type of kidney disease, I'm like, okay, we need to get you on SS31 because we've seen some improvements there. But when it comes, for those who are not familiar with SS31, what is that peptide?
So what SS31 does, again, another mitochondrial peptide, and this is one of the few drugs that actually does have a lot of human research on it. So it's actually an FDA-approved drug. It has an orphan drug status for treating ALS. It's called lamprotide, and it's designed to bind to cardiolipin, which is one of the key phospholipids. Remember, we talked about that whole lipid membrane of the mitochondria is so key. So this actually is this cardiolipin, which is this key phospholipid in the inner mitochondrial membrane. So when you look at the inner mitochondrial membrane, it's all curved like this. Remember your picture of your mitochondria? Well, the reason it's doing that is so it gives more surface area to make more ATP. So if I'm going through this membrane to make ATP, if I have more membrane, I can make more ATP. But if the mitochondria get disease, think about that membrane now kind of stretching like this, right? So instead of having all these waves in it, so now if I'm trying to make ATP, I can't because I don't have all the same structure. So that mitochondrial cristae, we call them, are restored when you put them on a lamprotide or SS31. So that's going to improve that electron transport chain efficiency, and you're going to have a lot less reactive oxygen species. So the best places we've seen that is, heart patients, cardiac patients. I find it really useful for my more severe muscle diseases and my COVIDers, people like that. So I really like SS31, and it's going to think of it as a really good repair peptide for the mitochondria.
Yeah, and some of the studies, interesting. I know we're not going to, just for the sake of time and some of the dosing stuff, there were some studies that I looked at and I was like, okay, they had it for like 40 days and different things like that. But the question is, you mentioned that cycling of Humanin. Are you cycling SS31 or kind of using it until like, okay, take a break, or I'm seeing what I want to see, now break from it? So what are you guys seeing with that?
So, typically we cycle this in 6-week cycles, but there may not be a reason to do that. I think we're always a little cautious with things, and we tend to find cycling is a better choice for things. So we'll cycle like 6 weeks on, take some time off, 6 weeks on, take some time off. But we have people now we're leaving on a little bit longer because it really seems to be helping them so much. And if we leave them on a bit longer, it seems to be helping them more. So we're using it a little bit more aggressively than when we first started using this peptide. I still think probably from a perspective of we just don't know the answers to all this, cycling things is always a better choice. But you could probably cycle it for long periods of time, like 12 weeks at a time.
And then you mentioned 5-amino-1-MQ a little bit earlier, and usually when I think 5-amino-1-MQ, it's another one of those indirect mitochondrial improving kind of things, right? Because it's not like a mitochondrial peptide, but can improve that salvage pathway. I want to say
exactly.
It's more
it's doing exactly the same thing as 1-methyl-nicotinamide does. It's blocking that N-methyltransferase that's depleting NAD. So the difference is that 5-amino-1-MQ is very aggressively blocking NNMT. So you actually start depleting 1-MNA levels, and 1-MNA has actually some of its own advantages. So I tend to prefer 1-MNA over 5-amino-1-MQ, but you can use either. Whichever if you like 5-amino-1, but they're kind of doing the same thing by inhibiting this enzyme. And this enzyme, remember, when we're revving up this enzyme, this methyltransferase enzyme, it's stealing methyl groups. So you're going to see a problem with poor methylation in these people who have high NNMT levels, and that's why when you keep giving NAD, the methylation even gets worse and worse and worse because you're using up more methyl groups to try and get rid of it. So blocking NNMT can be really helpful to support methylation as well. So you're going to enhance NAD metabolism. You're going to support methylation. So that's going to be beneficial whether you use 1-amino or 1-methyl-nicotinamide or 5-amino-1-MQ to do that.
Yeah, we do. I'm always concerned about that, and I know. Just we've had some conversation, and I think Dr. Yurth thinks I'm out here just gunslinging NAD. It's like, hi, I'm Dr. Jones. Here's your NAD. No, we like to.
I agree. You can use NAD appropriately, right?
Yeah.
So you cycle it. You use it with some of these blocking agents.
We don't overdo
and so I'm not going to say people should not use NAD. They should, but they should use it judiciously. It's the people who are doing it constantly all the time. That's going to be
too aggressively, or super high dosing it, which
high dose
NAD.
You want to use it judiciously and cycle it and use it with blockers. So you just want to do it under somebody who knows what they're doing. And the problem is that now everybody's going and getting their NAD infusions at the nearest IV bar.
Oh yeah, or come to my house and give me 1,000 milligrams of NAD, which is wild.
Yeah, exactly.
But for us, it's funny because when our patients come in and when they do the infusions, it's like I pass them a little cup and they're like, "What's this?" I was like, "Don't ask me questions, just take it." But no, I actually sell them. We use a trimethylglycine and a SAMe. We give them
so you're doing with methyl groups. Exactly. I mean, that's why you just need to do it with somebody who knows what they're doing. Using it appropriately.
Yeah, that's super important. So really cool compounds there, and I know we don't have all the time in the world here, but another one which you mentioned a little bit, we mentioned very briefly earlier, is methylene blue.
Yeah.
And so methylene blue is just basically, that electron donor and just kind of helping kind of bypass some of the broken complexes in the electron transport chain.
Yeah, so it's basically bypassing complexes 1 and 3. So you can kind of, it's like passing a potato, right? If I skip 2 people, it can pass it down further. So it can also definitely help support mitochondria because I can make ATP faster. I do want people to be a little more cautious with methylene blue than sometimes they are. And that's because one of the things people forget is that methylene blue actually depletes nitric oxide. And people don't think about that. So these people are taking methylene blue. Everybody's taking it like, the blue tongue and showing themselves on Instagram. And you don't really want to be taking methylene blue all the time because it will deplete nitric oxide because it activates nitric oxide synthase. And so you deplete nitric oxide. So over time, you're actually going to get endothelial dysfunction if you're taking methylene blue regularly, especially if you're not supporting nitric oxide levels, or if somebody has hypertension, things like that, you're going to make it worse. So I see all these people now taking methylene blue all the time. You really don't want to do that. You want to use methylene methylene blue periodically again, cycling it in periods of more stressful times, and maybe also while you're doing it to make sure that you're taking something that supports nitric oxide, like beet juice or Neo40 or arterial, something that supports endothelial function. I think people don't know that about methylene blue, and it's being you can just buy it over the counter now, and people are all gigged out on it. I love methylene blue. I do use it, but I don't use it continuously, and I use it with a nitric oxide booster.
Yeah. Important to know too. And also, please don't get your methylene blue off the internet, people that are listening, just because it's toxic.
When you guys see cheap methylene blue is not cheap. It's impossible to get good methylene blue cheap. It is not. I will tell you that all the pharmacists who make it for us, or Transcription, Scott Scher has a really good methylene blue product. It is not cheap to get real methylene blue. If you're finding it cheap, it is not healthy, good methylene blue.
No, that would be food grade methylene blue that you're getting very cheaply, which which definitely has tons of chemical impurities in there. It's basically defeating the thing that you think you're taking it for, because again, there's certain limits of toxins that can be, or heavy metals rather, that can be in that food grade methylene blue. So that's a super important takeaway there. So So this has all been so good, man. But before I get you out of here, I do have some, I have questions I love asking because I like getting your perspective on some things here. Because I believe that mitochondrial function is going to become more well known. I believe it's going to be more in the discourse of medicine and preventative medicine in the future. That's just me, because I feel like I think that's what the world wants, what the world needs, is to know more about this. Are there any new or emerging mitochondrial therapies that you may see on the horizon that you're excited about? Is there anything like you're like, wait a minute, they might be on to something here?
Yeah, I mean, well, one we actually have already that I'm kind of familiar from the bodybuilding world because it used to be sort of utilized there, which is called SLU-PP332.
Oh yeah.
We used to call SLOOP, but SLU-PP is now actually available from some compounding pharmacists. So what SLU-PP332 does is it binds to estrogen receptors. And actually, when you do that, you upregulate these genes that promote mitochondrial biogenesis. So especially something called pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase, or PDK. And that's a key regulator of glucose metabolism. So when you look at SLOOP, it really supports, by activating these estrogen receptors, it really supports metabolic disturbances. It acts as an exercise mimetic. It's a key regulator of glucose metabolism. I actually, of all the mitochondrial peptides, quite frankly, and this is actually not really peptides, a small, I guess it is a peptide, but it actually, I feel it the most. When I take that before I exercise, I actually feel it the most. And we really couldn't get it except off black markets for a while, which I don't encourage. But now actually some of the compounding pharmacists are starting to make this. So it's one to really, so SLU-PP332, I think its safety profile is really good. So I really like that. I think the other thing we're going to start seeing more prominent are what we call mitochondrial uncouplers. There's one called BAM15 that has kind of gained attention. It's only available black market. It's not really available in a safe form yet. But it's basically the small what happens with a mitochondrial uncoupler. Think of a mitochondrial uncoupler as it's sort of like revving your engine. You're using up gasoline, but not spitting out, but not moving. And so when you disrupt the protein gradient in mitochondria, you actually allow protons to flow through the mitochondrial membrane, but without driving ATP synthesis. So when you do that, you actually increase energy expenditure, right? So I'm not actually, I'm not using my ATP appropriately. I'm making, and so what happens when you do that is you get really nice weight loss, improvement in fatty acid oxidation, improvement in reactive oxygen species. It's not going to have that increased energy that you really are looking for, but it's really going to help with reducing obesity, helping lean muscle mass, improving insulin sensitivity. So I think these mitochondrial uncouplers are going to be something to keep an eye on, especially for things like fatty liver disease, or people who have a whole lot of reactive oxygen stress. And maybe in the neurodegenerative diseases, these are going to actually be beneficial. So keep an eye on these mitochondrial uncouplers. They're going to be pretty cool. And I think we're going to see a couple come to market in the near future.
Okay. Now, the SLUPP, is that one on the WADA list or the USADA list that you know of? Or?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
They don't specifically list it, but yeah, I don't know that you could test for it.
Okay.
but I'm pretty cautious with all my athletes just because I don't know.
Yeah, that's what
You
I'm
know,
like. You don't want to be the person they're talking
right,
about. They're
right.
like, "Oh,
So,
my
if
doctor
you
gave
look,
me
they
this."
basically kind
Right.
of like, it's like everything that could be considered in this
Mhm,
realm is gonna be
mhm,
banned, and so, I think that's the problem is if and again, I'm not sure how they would detect it, I don't think they'd be looking for it, but I think we have to be careful with all of our WADA, and
mhm.
which is a struggle, right? Well, what can we
Yeah.
use in our WADA athletes is really a struggle.
Yeah, no. And again, you just don't wanna be that person that
Right,
when you
exactly. It's like that's
when
the
your guy or
last thing you
girl
wanna
is
be
like,
is like the guy who gets
yeah,
somebody kicked out of their sport,
I
right?
know, it's like, and they're like,
Ugh.
"Oh, my doctor gave it to
And
me,"
now
and they're
and now
like,
you get
"Who's
all the
that
press for
doctor?"
being the guy who
It's like I didn't tell him to do that. I told him to have a slushy, not a sluppy, this kind of thing. But you don't want to be that person. So,
Yeah.
before I let you get out of here, just it's been and again, and I would like to say that I've been in this medicine, learning more about this over the last 5 or 6 years, and there's so much now that I wish I could tell myself 5 years ago, like, man, don't do that. Don't
Yeah.
you like number one thing I would tell myself, do not put the damn peptides in the same syringe. I would have told myself that 5 years ago because it sounds like a good idea. Sounds a good
Yeah.
idea. It's like, wow, I don't want to take 5 shots. Why don't I put them all in one syringe, right? But these are
Right.
things you learn. That would be my number one thing. But if you can go back in time a little bit, what would you tell your younger self about medicine and optimization and longevity? What's the main thing you would share with that younger version?
It's the kind of thing I always have to still remind myself is that we actually know nothing and everything we know might be wrong because most of what I learned in medical school is wrong. And we have to be able to admit that and pivot, right? So there's things I told people last year to do or take that I'm like, oh, this looks really good. And I usually wait till I think something's safe. So usually it's not that I found something that wasn't safe, but I really said, it's really not so effective. And so the biggest problem, I think, we go through all this training and you get taught all this stuff. And I always say it's a little bit like, you just built this beautiful house and then somebody walks into your house and goes, gosh, that color is horrible. You really don't want to admit that anything that we've spent all these years doing is wrong, but a lot of times it is. So it's really this humility to remember that we honestly know nothing and everything we do know might be right, might be wrong. So we should walk into things cautiously, make sure that they're safe. Like you said, don't just jump into everything. And number two, it's be able to really admit to people when you're like, you know what? Yeah, I know I told you that last year, but the more recent evidence says, you know what? It probably wasn't worth the money. Like I said, I can't think of anything I've recommended that's been harmful to people, but I could think of things I've recommended that over time I'm like, okay, that really was not all that beneficial. So I think we've got to be, we have to remember we don't know a lot and that knowledge is gaining like this. And every year we learn new things and we have to be able to adapt and pivot and adjust. And we have to be able to admit that to our clients that we've adapted and pivoted. And, most of what I learned in medical school, I would say is wrong.
Yep. Yeah. I would say, like, I call it the dud peptide, right? There's always that peptide. It's like being a comedian. Man, that joke bombed.
Yeah.
And I would say my biggest dud peptide was DSIP.
It's like deep sleep inducing peptide. What could be
Oh
better?
my God, I know.
It's
The
gonna
concept is
fix
so
everybody's
great.
sleep, and it's like, no, didn't.
Oh for 5. And it's like, yep, 0 for 5. No one got anything out of that peptide.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great. Deep sleep inducing peptide. What could be better?
Yeah, no, that was one. I was like, yes, FDA, take that one, please. So,
Yeah, right. Because we learn a little bit by trialing on ourselves and a little bit on trialing with our patients. And I always tell my patients that I go, listen, I'm not 100% sure, but this is safe. I just don't know. And then we start seeing the results. And when it's the nice thing about having, it's like, as much as I lecture and teach and do research, I will never let go of my patient base because they're still my kitchen. There's so many things you hear are going to be really good and you try them and you're like,
not so much.
Not so much.
Safe, but yeah, we're not going to do that again.
It's just not worth the money.
Definitely. So I want to thank you for your time today, man. This was amazing. I truly appreciate it. I know we both just flew back from Florida yesterday, and man, even though jet lag's a real thing, it's really it's real. I will say that is not a myth, not a myth. And so again, I appreciate your time. Before we get you out of here, if people want to know more about you and your practice and the cool things that you're doing, how can they find out?
So our clinic is Boulder Longevity Institute. So if you go to boulderlongevity.com, we also have a learning academy, much like you do, a learning academy there that we teach So you can sign up for the Learning Academy. We do monthly Q&As that are super, lots of doctors and everybody from under the sun does that. They ask really, really hard questions. So those are really fun. So you can sign up for those there as well, or you can go to BLI.Academy, which also has a lot of our We've got learning videos up there to learn how to read your own labs and things like that. But also for, the physicians out there, practitioners out there, these Q&As are amazing. So you can join that. Follow me at Dr. Yurth. Follow my podcasts and come to some lectures.
Wait, you have a podcast?
Follow me on my podcast. I do life with you. I don't have.
Oh, okay. Wait, I was like,
I do not have a podcast. I do not have the energy for that. I don't know how you do it.
It's a lot. We're holding on by a thread here. But hey, Dr. Yurth, I want to say thank you again, bottom of my heart. I look forward to seeing you at the next conference because I know we're gonna, we're in the same orbit now, man.
Yeah.
So I truly appreciate you.
Yeah.
And that's it. So have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Greg.
No worries. Thank you. And, hey, everyone, this is Dr. Greg Jones. I want to thank you all for listening to our podcast here. There will be more information, all the things that Dr. Yurth talked about, where to find her, where to learn more about her practice, and then the really cool things she's doing will be in the show notes. Until next time, everyone, this is it. Signing off.